Okay, welcome. And just before we get started here, we want to acknowledge that we're conducting this from the traditional territory of the Inkle-Kaplan and Syilx people, and want to also acknowledge our Métis population and their contributions to the Nicola Valley. Uh, we're here with Shaun Strang tonight, and Shaun is a CPA, or a chartered professional accountant. Shaun moved to Merritt from Edmonton, Alberta. He started his career actually in the oil patch, and he was driving semis and welding and working oil rigs. And after completing a Bachelor of Commerce from the University of Alberta, Shaun entered the CPA designation program, performed a wide variety of operational accounting roles, and then this ultimately led him here to Merritt, where he's working in municipal government. So Shaun, first off, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm super stoked to talk a little bit about the exciting career that is accounting.
Right on. Well, you're definitely selling it to start with. So just take this. Can you tell us a little bit more about your occupation and just your current position?
Totally, yeah. So as an occupation, I'm an accountant, which means a wild number of different things. A lot of people, when they hear about, hey, somebody's an accountant, they think, hey, can you do my taxes? And that while accountants do taxes, that's a small subset of people. For example, I pay somebody else to do my taxes because I have no idea how to do them. But there's a wide range of people who are accountants. So some accountants do taxes, some accountants work in public practice, and they do things like audit books to make sure that people aren't stealing money or that money is being counted correctly throughout the organization. Other accountants run businesses. I kind of certainly got into more of an operational accounting, which deals with numbers, but not necessarily the numbers that you might expect. From my history, I've worked in welding firms where the numbers you're dealing with are, weld inches per man hour, or amount of trigger time that you're on a MIG welder in an hour, something to that effect. So the accounting field lends itself really well to doing a lot of different things with numbers, and certainly taxes is only one of them. Right now, I'm working with the city of Merritt. I'm actually my home department is kind of running the full cycle accounting process. So accounts payable, which is the money that the city of Merritt owes to people, payroll, which is of course the money that's being paid to employees, accounts receivable, which is the money that people owe to the city of Merritt. But I'm actually on loan to the Recovery Operations Center right now. So dealing with the Merritt floods, and a lot of that is going to the provincial government and talking about how we could find some partnerships to fund a lot of the flood recovery needs. So a wide field, lots of different opportunities, and certainly very few of them have to do with doing taxes.
Awesome. I'll make sure I don't ask you to help me with my taxes.
I know a good person, but it's not me.
Right on. So in your normal role, what kind of like general duties and responsibilities? I know you kind of alluded to this already, but what are some of those just duties and responsibilities with your job?
Totally. So, kind of at the beginning of an accounting career, when you're going to that full cycle accounting and managing the normal business process, you might start out as a bookkeeper, or an accounts payable clerk or something like that. And that's kind of what I did out of high school. And at that, you're entering invoices, or supervising clerks who are entering invoices or something like that. At where I'm at right now, it's supervising a number of people who are doing all the different accounting processes. So when you think of accounting processes in a company, it's basically the money's going in or the money's coming out, and you have to track that. So you track that in what's called a general ledger, which is usually a software program. So you track the money that you pay people, the money that people are paying you, and the money that people owe you. And you kind of manage that through invoices that come in, you send out invoices, and then you send out payroll. So it's kind of this, we call it full cycle accounting. It happens on a monthly basis. And it's basically making sure that process is correct, making sure that you're spending the money in the right places, and comparing your performance to budget. So that's a lot of it. And a lot of what I do right now is managing staff who are actually running the more technical aspects of that. And then if there's a problem, I'll step in and provide some guidance wherever I can.
Sorry, my unmuting wasn't working. That sounds good. And a lot of what you said probably will answer some of this question, but hopefully we'll get a little bit of a different angle on this. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about what your workplace or work environment looks like being at City Hall. And obviously you do work as part of a team, you lead a team, it sounds like. But can you tell me, is there any work that you would be doing separate? Like you're not always just leading your team, you have specific duties of your own that you have to take care of. And also, one other little thing to add on, is there any travel involved? Or are you pretty much working in front of your computer in your office all day long?
Sure. You know what? Let's answer that backwards, just to keep it interesting. Not a lot of travel, and you won't find too many accounting roles that have a lot of travel. There are certainly some in like public practice. If you're in auditing and you're working for one of the big auditing firms, they'll often send you, an hour or two out of town, out of your home area to go audit a client file. But most accountant roles are kind of the Monday to Friday, 8 to 5 in an office, not a lot of travel. In terms of direct work, absolutely there's direct work, and it depends how big of company you are. If you're in a $100 million company and you've got 8 direct reports, you're probably managing people all day long. I get really lucky at City Hall in that I have a pretty good balance. I have some phenomenal staff who kind of just manage themselves and know their own processes and come to me when they need some help. And then I get a lot of hands-on work as well. So a lot of that is more the typical accounting thing, solving puzzles. So again, I talked about earlier, we have our general ledger, which is basically tracking all the money, who owes who money, what money is set aside for different purposes. And at City Hall, that's things like, it can be something like grant and aid. There's a grant and aid process with City Hall of all the different community organizations that receive money. Or it might be something like, how much did we spend on chlorine at the pool? And so we have individual department managers that manage the granular details of that. But I help a lot in the roll up account. So once this all comes up and it goes, how much did we spend on the pool, and how much revenue did we take in, and how much are taxpayers paying for that particular service? That's a lot of what I do, kind of on a day-to-day basis. To put my hands on. And then the work environment, there's a bunch of, and again, accounting is such a wide field. If you're in public practice, it's a fairly focused thing. If you're managing people, it's very important to be somewhat social. So I have again a phenomenal team, and usually when you're in that kind of accounting role, you kind of have your own office with a door because you're talking about oftentimes more sensitive issues. But yeah, my team's really good. We all kind of work in an office behind a computer. Probably the most exercise we get in a day is a standing desk. So it is certainly a desk-bound job.
Yeah. Thanks for shedding light on that, because often I think people think, oh, accountants are just like bean counters that sit in their own little office and do their own thing. But really, in your role in particular, you really are working as part of a team. Yes, certainly you have your own projects, your own pieces of the puzzle that you're working on, but you do rely on other members of your team to bring it all together.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. So can you describe to me what a typical day or week at work might look like for you?
So when you're working in industry or municipal government and not for like an auditing firm, you're usually concentrated on kind of more of a monthly cycle. So at the beginning of the month, you're entering invoices in, you're entering payroll. Towards the end of the month, you're kind of closing out those accounts. So you close out the individual, this is how much we spent, this is how much payroll was, and then you kind of reconcile those to budget. And then you just basically do it again and again every single month. And it sounds boring, but it's kind of a small part, especially once you get into the kind of more of that management role. So I would say on average, about probably 2 weeks a month is towards that full cycle accounting role of using the spreadsheets that you've developed to do that full cycle process, and about 2 weeks on special projects. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, at the city, that's special projects like grant and aid, like capital budgeting is actually pretty fun. Capital budgeting in the city is going to a bunch of different department managers, talking about what needs what things they might need next year. Whether it's a condenser at the skating rink or new fencing for the dog pound or something like that. And so again, it's one of those collaboration social environments where you have to go to a bunch of other department managers and talk things through. Hey, is this really going to cost $50,000, or could we get it done for 30? There's a lot of that going, and so it is a wildly collaborative environment, and very much against the whole, accountants sit in their office and kind of puzzle to themselves. Not to say that type of accountant exists. That's just certainly not my job.
Yeah. Thanks. Can you go on? I'm going to go a little bit off script here, but I know for me, even as an adult, I had to be educated on what a capital expenditure is. Can you explain to the students sort of what that means?
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry for the use of jargon. So in any company, municipality, anything else, you have two types of money that you spend. You have operational money, and then you have capital money. And it's a fairly simple differentiation. So capital money is money that you spend on things that last a long time, and operational money is things that you spend that you kind of have to spend every year. So again, using the previous example, chlorine for the pool, you just got to keep buying it. It's not an asset that you get. Whereas when we go do fencing for the dog park, that's a capital asset. So in your own personal life, you go to No Frills and get some bananas. That's an operational expense. But you go out and buy a new Tesla, and that's a capital asset that'll last for quite a few years. So we track them under different budgets because they're different types of expenditures. They're either reoccurring or they're a one-time purchase that you get the value from over many years.
Perfect analogy. Thank you.
Yeah, that was awesome. I feel like I know way more about the work for my job sometimes. So that's great. So can you tell us maybe the thing you like the most about the work that you do, and then maybe challenge as well?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the thing I like the most, I'm sure it's fairly obvious by now, but I like the people. I absolutely love the people. And that's probably one of my favorite things about having moved to Merritt. Merritt's actually my first municipal government job. So I've been here for about a year and a half, and it's just a phenomenal team and a phenomenal group of people. So when you're in that type of role and you're working with a fairly, dialed in, engaged team of people, it's a really great experience. It is an absolute phenomenal experience. So that's probably the thing I like the most. It's just dealing with a whole bunch of different people who all have different views and different priorities, and trying to synthesize those and run an organization. Challenging or difficult? Certainly there's difficulties in dealing with people. You know what? It's probably the same answer. When you get into that supervisory role, it is difficult often to synthesize and get everyone on the same page. So a lot of people think that the role of a manager is to just get people to work as hard as you can, which is absolutely not the role of a manager. When you're managing people, there's a I would say the far more important thing is to make sure people are happy, to make sure people are emotionally engaged, to make sure that they're happy with their job, to know what's going on in their lives so that you know how to kind of interact with them, and to just take a genuine interest. So it's a difficult part for sure, because it's time intensive. But when you're at that management level, I would say that that's probably the most important and difficult part of the job.
Awesome. I may be able to speculate as to the answer to this next question, but what is the most memorable experience?
I bet you will. Yeah, honestly, Dave, I've worked in a bunch of like public companies that are listed on the stock exchange, and private equity companies that have bought, other firms for tens of millions of dollars and done multi-million-dollar bids and got projects, and nothing compares to the floods that happened mid-November here? Absolutely nothing. And I'm sure that's what you're speculating on. But so in a municipality, when a large event happens, and it was the fires over the summer, and of course it was the devastating floods in the fall. When an event like that happens, it's up to the municipality to run what's called an emergency operations center. And that emergency operations center, it's fairly well specced out. People have different roles, but it's mostly staffed by people in the municipality that have some training in that. And of course, like my role in the EOC was finance. I also ran a logistics role because I have some experience with that in previous careers. And it was probably the wildest thing I've ever experienced. I went to work at, I don't know, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning on that morning, and I probably got home 21 hours later to an empty town, and then got up and did it again. And at some point, it was 2 weeks later. It was the wildest experience I've ever had. And I've worked some fairly significant hours in private equity. When you've got a deal on the line, you work some hours and you make it happen. But there was never that sort of like, hey, we're all rowing this together. We're all working 20 hours a day to try and accomplish the same goal. So for sure, Merritt floods 2021, that was the most memorable experience of my career, and something that nobody would ever sign up for as an accountant. Hey, I'm going to go be an accountant and run weeks at a time for a ridiculous amount of hours to try and do the best thing for the town. But it was a really cool experience, and I hope we did a lot of good for the town.
Well, from my perspective, I was certainly impressed with the way the city handled the situation. It was like completely unprecedented, and I think you guys should give yourselves a pat on the back for that.
There's always things you look back at and think you would have done better, and hopefully I never have the opportunity to do that.
Hopefully not. So can you tell us a little bit about the pathway you took to get to your current position? It sounds like you've had a lot of different experiences, and I would love to hear about it. And
Totally.
Did you have any idea that this is what you'd want to do in high school?
In high school, probably not. So grade 12, I did probably what would be a typical, hey, I'm going to go work for a year and find myself. And I went into the oil patch because I lived in Alberta, and that's just what you do because you make a fairly large amount of money. So I worked as a welder for a while. I worked service rigs. I got my class 1 license and drove a truck. And you know what? In any of those careers, I could have been perfectly happy, and I would highly encourage my kids to go in any one of those careers that they were interested in. For me personally, the oil patch brings about a certain kind of work away, come home, work away. It wasn't compatible probably with what I was looking for. So I went to the University of Alberta, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but my dad was an accountant, and his dad was an accountant, and and honestly, I didn't have a bunch of videos like this to go watch and see, hey, there's all these different jobs out there. So that's actually how I became an accountant, is just I didn't really have a better idea, and my dad and his dad were an accountant. It worked out really good. Would I have done something else? I don't actually know the answer to that, but it probably, if I had a bunch of videos like this, it probably would have at least let me know what I was in for, and what would be involved. So yeah, after about 4 years kind of doing different trades-based jobs, I went to school. I got out of school, and in accounting, especially in operational accounting, you start as kind of more of a bookkeeper role where you're entering invoices and entering payroll, and then you go to a larger company and eventually get into kind of a management role. So I've done that through a bunch of different industries, and yeah, municipal government is the most recent one here.
Great, perfect example of how people don't have to be stuck with one career for their entire life, right? Like maybe you're even going to find something else, who knows, one day. Yeah.
I'd like to think so, yeah.
It's just nice for students to know that, just because they decide to do one thing doesn't mean that they can't do something else a little bit later on. It's nice to see that.
And that is specifically around government work. I've been in private industry for my entire career up till now, but I've known a lot of people in government, and usually in government, you start out your career, you're paid a little more. Towards the end of your career, you're paid a little less. That's kind of the going mentality. But one of the big things is you have the ability to shift your career often into different places. So I know a number of people that work for the provincial government, and they've worked for wildfire, and then they wanted a bit of a shift in what they were doing every day. So they go work for, roads, infrastructure, FLINRO. You actually get to like pick up your career, keep your level that you're working at, and go work in a different department. So that's kind of a cool feature for government for sure.
Yeah, lots of opportunities that way. So just building on that, can you tell us, and you've already spoken about this a little bit, but can you tell me a bit more about other career options available for someone planning to pursue a career in your field?
Totally. So you go to school, I should have looked this up. The CPA designation, once you get out of high school or once you get out of university, it looks a little bit different now than it did. So when I graduated, there was a couple of different designations. There was what was called a CA, a CMA, and a CGA. Just had different specialties. So now they're all combined into one. But it is important to recognize that there are wildly different examples of accountants. So a lot of accountants that people think of more when they think of accountants work for what's called public practice. And that's for one of the big auditing firms. And so if you own a company that, is a $20 million a year company, you would hire one of these firms to come in and look at your books. You'd make sure that nobody's taking any money for starters. Make sure that the revenue you're recognizing and the money you're owing is all correct, and the financial picture that you're getting presented from your company is effectively correct. How much money have you made this year? What kind of financial shape is your company in? So the people that do that are called auditors, and they work for one of many different auditing firms. There's big ones, there's small ones, and they just kind of go to the company and do the same thing. There's a lot of accountants that do that. If you're really into solving puzzles and kind of working your way up a ladder, that's a really good career choice. Operational accounting, which is kind of more what I went into, is really good for people who maybe like like a little more operational basis, a little more blue collar basis, I guess. I've been called the blue collar accountant by a few of my friends, and blue collar meaning somebody who gets their hands dirty, can weld, can do that kind of stuff. Because when you get into operational accounting, you're really dealing with more than financial figures, as I was kind of mentioning earlier. You're dealing with productivity, you're dealing with corporate strategy, that kind of thing. What else is there? There's a lot of, like, if you get into a bigger company, Trans Mountain's coming through the valley. It's a really good example of a very large company that would have some very interesting opportunities. They have project accountants and cost accountants. So your entire job is this particular project. How many rock trucks do we have working on this project? What's their rate? What's their productivity basis? And you just really dial into that one project and just make sure the money's being spent effectively. So yeah, there's a fairly big range of that. And then there's people who do taxes.
Yeah.
I keep forgetting them. Very important part of accounting, but not mine.
Yes. And then of course there are accountants that specialize in one type of tax, whether it be corporate or personal income tax kind of thing.
Totally. To dive into these, I could probably spend 20 minutes and that there's probably 4 different specialties just dealing with Canada, US tax differences. And that's just one tiny little field of accounting, right? So it really is a career where you can go into, you can be a person who's super introverted, likes solving puzzles and just staying in their own office and do very, very well. Or you can be a person who likes socializing and building teams and motivating people and still do very, very well in a different stream.
That's great. Thank you.
Nice. It's funny you mentioned that, Shaun. I, as a citizen of the US and Canada, I work every year with an accountant, and that's her sole role is helping us sort of dual citizens navigate taxes in both countries.
Right. right? That is a big money role. I would highly recommend, if that was your thing as an accountant, that's a very good way to earn a living.
Yeah, she's doing pretty good off me so far. So, what does the what? So, speaking more about the different types of accounts and accounting in general, what do you think the future looks like for this occupation? Is there high demand down the road? Do you think that there's advances in technology, societal changes that are going to have a big impact on your work?
So in the accounting field, we've talked a lot over probably the last 5, maybe a little more years about how AI is going to change the accounting field. Because at the core, in beginner level accounting jobs, what you're really doing is you're taking expenses and you're classifying them into different categories. I spent this much on tools this month. I spent this much on heating this month, whatever it is. And you're starting to see that in a lot of accounting programs. So you saw a lot of, when you drive around and you see somebody's name, general accountant or bookkeeper or something like that, that's definitely a decreasing field. So the general accounting, the bookkeeper field is a decreasing field because you're seeing a lot of these AI programs starting to step in. There's a lot of technology solutions in terms of like somebody having an expense. You take your phone, you take a picture of the receipt from Home Depot for a condo that you own, and it automatically classifies it and puts it into your books, and you never need a bookkeeper for it. So certainly that lower level accounting is not a dying field necessarily, but a diminishing field for sure. The type of accounting where audit and assurance, when you're coming into a company and looking for patterns and talking to people, like I was talking about earlier, you own a $20 million a year company. There's going to be a field for those type of people who are really in depth, solving puzzles, talking to people within the company, figuring out that all the numbers are correct. And then more importantly, you know what, I guess shameless plug, but operational accounting is something that it would be very, very hard for AI to replace the person who's dealing with 5 or 6 different clerical staff and kind of running the books of a company. So I'd say on the whole, it's definitely a growing field. It's a growing field probably at that more managerial level for sure. And yeah, that's probably what I can say about it.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. So if I'm a high school student and I'm thinking about, I'm doing kind of a skills inventory and my likes and dislikes and my interests. What kind of personal attributes, skills, interests align really nicely with someone that's interested in accounting?
I would say the majority of successful accountants, and again, the field's so wide, it's hard to answer that question. But the majority of successful accountants I know have at least a fairly solid interest in computers, which, it doesn't necessarily, like, Excel is where accountants live. Microsoft Excel is absolutely where we live. You don't have to know that in high school, but having that curiosity for how things work, how things are organized, the logic behind decisions is pretty important. Computer skills, if you don't have to have a lot of computer skills. You have to have an interest in computers and how it works, I think, in order to have good success in the field for sure. As long as you have an interest in things, you can definitely learn it. Some of the other skills, if you're kind of like a problem solving puzzle person, there's probably a very good home for you in accounting. Absolutely. And if you are kind of that go-getter who likes, how do I say this? You're a go-getter who likes connecting a bunch of different pieces and a bunch of different people. There's definitely a good career for you in accounting as well. And of course, I mean, I've had very limited stints in public practice accounting and kind of the more traditional accounting roles, so I can kind of speak with a little bit more authority on operational accounting. And if you're the person who um, can talk to a bunch of different people, figure out what their skill sets are, motivate them, and identify well with them, you're going to do well no matter what. But if you combine that with a little bit of interest in numbers and logic, then accounting is probably a pretty good career field for you to look into. Oh, I think you're muted there, Jen.
I thought I unmuted myself. Sorry about that. So probably if you're somebody that has an aptitude, in mathematics, that's a good fit. And also somebody that's got good organizational skills would also be really well suited to that.
You know what? Everyone says that. I hate math. Hate it. Hate math, Jen. You don't have to be good at math. Organization, wildly important. Logic, super important. So if you can think through a logical problem and come up with a solution, that's more important in operational finance. But the actual math skills. So when people think about math, they're thinking about, especially in a high school environment, they're thinking about kind of algebra and geometry and stuff. Super, super important to know that. But if you're not wildly, I'm not going to lie. I almost failed high school math. And I am very good at what I do. So if you don't love math, don't throw out accounting as a career, because there's not a ton of the actual pure math, algebraic math, that kind of stuff that you end up doing. A lot of it's just like logic based, fairly simple math that you need to then apply to the real world.
Yeah, and be able to use that Excel program to get your formulas right, so you get the numbers you need.
Totally. Yeah. And I would say, like, if you were interested in computer programming, that would be a much higher indication of how you'll do in accounting than math ever would be, for sure.
Interesting. Good to know. Okay, my turn. Is there anything a high school student could or should be doing right now to help prepare for a career in your field?
Just trying to read my notes here. When I was in high school, you know what? I wasn't orienting really towards being an accountant, so I probably can't speak with a measure of authority on what you should do in high school. When I look back at what I wish I would have done, I don't think I'd do anything differently. You come out, if you take a year off, get some experience in the real world. There's nothing wrong with that, right? So in high school, if you want to be an accountant, you kind of look at the university, look at what the minimum course requirements are, and make sure your GPA is up there. And there's probably a reason to look for some mentors and job shadow. And I think that's probably the same advice for any career whatsoever. And you know what? I'd be more than happy if you had any students that wanted to come job shadow for a day or half a day or whatever that is, I'd be more than happy, because I think that's probably the most important experience of, you know what, if I was in grade 12 and somebody said, hey, come job shadow me being a welder, I could have probably saved 6 months of my life and went, oh, that's probably not what I'm good at, rather than going to try it out when I had rent to pay and everything else. So I think my advice on that would be the same as any career. See if you can go job shadow somebody and actually get a feel for it.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for that offer, because we may have somebody we want to line up with you, actually.
Be happy to.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions for students that would like to explore your line of work in more detail? Well, I think you've sort of given us that, job shadowing, but is there anything else you can think of?
You know, I don't know of a lot of resources out there that probably tell you a lot more than what I could tell you in this interview. Until you're actually in the field, it's hard to get that across on what you do on a daily basis, for sure.
For sure. And finally, can you provide any other general advice for young people as they consider their possible career choices?
Man, I don't know what the messaging is now. So I've been out of high school for an embarrassingly long amount of time now. But the messaging was very, very strong when I was in high school of go to university. You need to go to university if you're going to do anything with yourself. And so I went to university. I'm totally happy with that choice. It took me a few years, but I've done well. I've got into something that I enjoy. I think I probably could have enjoyed something in the trades just as much. So just because somebody's saying you need to go to university, I don't know if that's the same messaging anymore, but I think we have a very high underappreciation of what does an HVAC tech do? I think there's a lot of kids in grade 12 that probably have no idea what an HVAC tech does. I know I didn't when I was in grade 12, and I didn't really have a good idea of what an accountant did, even though my dad did it. So keep your eyes open and don't discount any careers just because it's like you come home with your hands dirty or you come home with your hands clean. I don't think that's a good indication of success or happiness in a career.
Yeah, that sounds like really sound advice. Thank you.
You bet.
Awesome. Well, Shaun, we're kind of at the end of our questions here. So we just want to say again, thanks so much for joining us tonight and shedding some light on your career and your path. And I know that I'm excited for students to see this and maybe even join you one day in the office.
Cool. Yeah, just you know my number. Give me a shout and we can definitely work that out. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That was really interesting.
Awesome. Have a good night.
Yeah. Take care, Shaun. Bye-bye.
Bye.